There've been a lot of brewery closures lately, and I've seen news pieces and speculation from craft beer consumers, and I felt obligated to jump on here and kind of give my 2 cents on why I think this is happening. Now, I'm going to preface this by saying that this may be a little negative to some folks, and frankly, it is kind of a negative topic, but I wanted to share my insights because I think a lot of people have a misconception on what it means when people decide to shut their breweries down. So here's my take on why breweries are starting to close and some trends that I see in craft beer that may be affecting this. So right off the bat, everybody knows the economy is kind of weird right now. People aren't spending as much money, and pretty much every business owner that I talk to has expressed some struggles with sales. So we're going to leave that off the table and focus on things that are more specific to the craft beer industry. First and foremost, everything's more expensive. Ingredients are more expensive, labor's more expensive, loans are more expensive, rent is more expensive, utilities are more expensive, and craft beer is an industry built on manufacturing. Manufacturing is generally lower margins, so you take a business that is relatively lower margin and increase the cost of goods, the materials that it takes to produce the product that you sell, and that pinches the profit margin quite a bit. And sometimes you're losing money, and it's really difficult to pay bills, which leads to potentially not paying rent. So leases are actually one of the biggest killers of craft beer right now. So we saw a boom in the early 2010s where breweries opened up in these warehouse spaces and these cheaper, more affordable spaces just outside of the busy parts of town because you're opening the manufacturing business that has relatively lower margins and you needed that cheaper rent. So what we're seeing happen is that a lot of leases are ending and are up for renewal, and what's happening is the landlords are either increasing rent prices that are unsustainable for the business model that is operating there, or they're deciding to not renew the lease altogether and just bulldoze the place and build condos or something that is more profitable. And I've seen a handful of breweries, specifically in the Austin area, that have shuttered because of this exact reason. Another factor that a lot of people talk about but don't really understand is saturation. And saturation is a tricky term because it could mean a few things to a bunch of different people, but for this instance, I'm going to describe it as the amount of beer that is sold being stagnant and the number of people producing that product, beer, increasing. So you've got a certain amount of beer that is sold, and this could be in a city, this could be in a state, this could be countrywide. Beer sales in general are staying stagnant, if not shrinking, and breweries are continuing to open. So that makes it a very difficult and competitive market where everybody's vying for the same shelf space, the same tap space, and it just becomes very competitive and difficult to sell your beer. So with all that saturation comes one of the perks of the craft beer industry right now, for the consumer at least, which is there is more craft beer available to the consumer than has ever been available, at least since this wave of craft beer has been going on, which is amazing as somebody who walks through the aisles to be able to pick out any beer that you want. I remember back in the early 2010s when I found out that Founders was coming to Texas and KBS was going to be released here, and it was amazing and incredible. And now you can walk through the aisles and see some of the most amazing imperial stouts just readily accessible. And with all of that accessibility and craft beer being so ubiquitous in the country, it ultimately leads to something I've seen in my personal life as well as other craft beer consumers, the craft beer fatigue. Everybody goes through their craft beer phase where they start off with a pale ale and they immediately skyrocket into the double, triple imperial bourbon barrel aged stouts and drink all of the high ABV beers and come back to more balanced, easy drinking beer. But we are seeing this fatigue from people, not only just the beers that they're drinking, but just going to breweries in general. So there is a brewery most likely within 5 miles of your house, and if you live in a major metropolitan area, there's probably 20 or 50 of them. So they're all over the place. And this makes craft beer not as cool as it used to be. Craft beer used to be this really unique experience that you were willing to go sit on a picnic table, sweat your ass off in a warehouse with no AC, and drink a beer out of a shaker pint, and that was a great time for you. Now that craft breweries are everywhere, that experience is not enough to bring people in. Which brings me on to what I think is the most significant change in craft beer, that is the pivoting of the craft brewery business model. This is going to take a second to unpack, so bear with me. But craft breweries are, at their core, manufacturing businesses. You take ingredients, you manufacture them, and you turn them into beer. And you distribute them often at wholesale prices to retailers so that they could then sell it to the ultimate consumer. These types of businesses are built off of volume. And with all of the other factors that I just mentioned, selling a large amount of volume in this industry right now is extremely difficult. Couple that with it's a low profit margin item, it's not very desirable to sell a small amount because you're not making any money. So craft breweries, with the success that they've had in the last few years, have been pivoting more to the on-site taproom model. You go to the brewery and they have a nice, beautiful tap room. Maybe they've got some events going on. They've got food trucks. They've got live music. And so they're competing with bars and restaurants around their area as well now, because essentially at their core, they are hospitality businesses just like bars and restaurants. And the big problem with this is those are two fundamentally different business models, and they take two fundamentally different skill sets to operate. And so if you transition from the manufacturing business model into the retail hospitality business model, you could gain more margin by selling the beer to the consumer, but you're running a completely different business that has completely different variables that you need to manage, which is fine if that's what you want to do. But I'm here to tell you that a lot of breweries, myself included, are not interested in running this type of business model, which is leading to some burnout in the industry. So if the only viable business model is to be a taproom / restaurant / event space, a lot of people are not willing to do that. They're not willing to pivot to run a different business model that, if I'm being frank, is not really about brewing beer at all. It's about hosting people and creating a nice experience for people to come out and enjoy beer and sometimes wine and spirits on a property that is a decent venue. So if you ask your friends what's their favorite brewery, oftentimes they'll list 4 things that have nothing to do with the beer. Oh, it's the ambiance, it's kid friendly, it's pet friendly, they have great food trucks. Maybe they've got my favorite band playing there on Tuesdays. But this leads to a lot of people being disheartened by the fact that they put their heart and soul into brewing beer, and now that's not really a great option for them to run a business. So we're at this crossroads where craft beer has pivoted to the on-site taproom business model and less of a focus on manufacturing of beer. So we're seeing a lot of those larger distribution breweries pivot, and some of them are closing. That's my take on the craft beer industry and why breweries are closing. I will most likely be putting out another video in the future detailing my perspective on my current business model. But that's it. Hopefully we can keep these breweries afloat and keep the craft beer industry rocking as always. But I would say it is likely that we will see several more breweries begin to close. And unfortunately, it's not a surprise. So now you know. Go out and buy some beer from somebody, preferably at the tap room, because that's where all the money is. Cheers.